Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Centrick Talks Property. Today we're going to be talking all things property investment. So whether you're a first-time investor or a seasoned landlord, you're going to want to tune in. We're joined by James Dunn. He's our lettings manager here at Centrick. The reason we've got him on the show, his team let over 1,000 properties per year and look after a property portfolio of around 1,500. So there's not much he doesn't know about investing in property and what you should look out for as a landlord. So hope you enjoy. If you do enjoy, please give us a like and subscribe, but I hope you enjoy the episode. So welcome, James. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you'd had to travel really far from the office today to be with us, but for those that don't know you, give us a bit of background into yourself and the team you work with here in Birmingham.
So my team look after around about 1,500 investment properties within Birmingham city centre and the surrounding areas. Most of our clients are actually based overseas now and have bought for the sole purpose of investment.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a big trend, offshore investment?
Absolutely. For Birmingham, it's been, I think, massive in in terms of all the commercial aspect of the investment in Birmingham. For every one of those, there's been new residential investments, and most of it's come from overseas buying.
Far East?
Yeah, lots of Far East, lots of Hong Kong and Asia as well.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So I think today what we want to talk about is investing for rookies, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
Be nice to get some of your hints and tips and ideas so that hopefully we can put some of our investor clients or newbies in the investment world on the right track. So
Absolutely.
If we start with then, I suppose, if I was setting out on an investment today and I thought, right, got a pot of cash, I want to buy something as a buy-to-let.
Yeah.
What would be some of the hints and tips you would kind of give to me if I called you up and said, look, I've got 200 grand, I want to spend it on a buy-to-let property. What sort of thing would you be suggesting I do or spend with that money?
Absolutely. So I think the first part of that is the research. So you need to make sure that you don't necessarily know the city you're buying in specifically, but you know its good and its bad points. You understand it and you know what the connections are like, what the demographics are like, as in for tenants and who lives there. And I suppose the amenities as well, so things like universities and places of work and a commercial presence in the area. Yeah. That would be my first step. And then I think I'd start to then narrow it down development by development and look at, which one's better because of its location or which one's better because of its amenities.
Yeah.
And I'd break it down.
And I think that's one of the biggest things I'd say and have learned over the years is you need to know your market. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know it inside out, you probably should start to.
Absolutely. I think the research is really, really important.
Yeah, okay. And then in terms of target demographic, what should somebody be looking for? What kind of audience should they be thinking my property probably should steer towards?
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing, and it's a question I'm asked a lot actually, is who by the time an investor's come to the end, I suppose, of that journey of they've done the research, they've put the offer in, they've had that all agreed, they've got a mortgage and everything. Yeah. And the question that they then get to the end is, okay, well, who's going to be renting my property? Yeah. And I suppose the one underlying factor and something I always say is that there's not one specific tenant. A really good investment will be something that is open to lots and lots of different demographics of tenants.
Wider audience.
Precisely. Yeah. Because then you don't limit yourself to, okay, well, it's only going to be students or it's only going to be working professionals because it's right next to a HSBC building or whatever. Mm-hmm. You keep it really, really open because then if times of uncertainty hit and that demographic no longer wants to rent, you're still open to someone else. Yeah. And that's really important. And that's how to make a good investment.
Okay. And then I suppose in terms of what they're purchasing, there's a lot of options out there, whether it be houses that are freehold and could potentially be house shares. Yeah. You've got the second-hand apartment market, and then you've got the new build apartment market or world, should we say. Yeah. Is there any sort of preference from you if you were to say, they're all available to you, which they are in the market?
Of course, yeah.
What would you be advising a landlord or a potential investor?
Potential investor. So I think they all come with their merits and their downfalls, I suppose. I think a more seasoned investor might want to purchase freehold usually because they might want that kind of hands-on, they might want that family demographic to rent, which often obviously freehold comes with garden and outside space and parking.
A bit more maintenance for the tenants sometimes.
Bit more maintenance for the tenants and actually sometimes for the landlord as well, because in a leasehold development you won't have to think about roofs or communal areas or things like that, because it will usually be handled by an estate management agent, similar to Centrick. Then you mentioned new homes, obviously. New homes is great. Naturally, often they are, I suppose, the more expensive part of the market. But with that comes, brand new, you're in warranty.
Yeah.
Often they're highly desirable by tenants because they've got the latest fixtures and fittings. Often they'll come with a concierge or gym or, depending on where they are. So I suppose there's a place in the market for every investor. And actually, that each of those has a price tag. Each of those has pros and cons, and each of those will have a respective yield from an
I think it's a really good point because it can depend how hands-on you want to be as a landlord.
Precisely.
And like you said, if you buy a new build or a new build apartment or an apartment on its own, then you're hopefully as a landlord going to be slightly less hands-on because of, like you say, the building itself is already maintained by the management company. So the communal gardens, the exteriors of the building, the lift, etc.
Yeah.
All you really need to worry about is the internal four walls,
Precisely.
so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that's advice I've always given out is it depends how, a lot of investors, like you say, are not local, that can be international. So buying a more modern apartment can be a plus over a house or a house share because they tend to be a little bit more labour intensive, maybe is the right word. And particularly with gardens as well, you get some really good tenants that will look after the garden. And you get some ones that don't pay attention to it for 2 years and then they move out and you're left with a bit of a jungle maybe to deal with.
Yeah, totally.
I suppose again it's narrowing those down. But I suppose for a novice investor, an apartment or a new build would be...
I think so, because I think apartments appeal to... usually a wider demographic, I would say, because young professionals, are probably the most desirable demographic of tenant. I always feel from a landlord's perspective. I think that's probably, there's a bit of a stigma attached to that because they feel like the right tenants to have. But they will often want apartments in the city with good connections, close to work. There's kind of that nightlife, that shopping kind of scene stuff around there. Hence, I suppose they're the easiest ones to go for.
Okay. I suppose something to consider what we've not touched on there is with an apartment block for being hands-off and the building being run by somebody else, they just need to be aware that there's a service charge and ground rent attached.
Precisely.
And to factor that into any of their gross to net sort of yields they're working out. And
I think they really, really fluctuate depending on where you're buying, depending on the development, the number of units, the amount of on-site amenities that accesses. Is there a car park, etc.? And they can fluctuate from, £80-90 a month to £200-250 a month, depending on where you buy.
So it can have a really big impact on actually the cash in the pocket at the end of the month or year from a landlord's perspective. Okay.
Absolutely.
If we talk about, we touched briefly there then on tenant sort of target audience or the demographics.
Who's renting my property?
You've got, families, more mature tenants, we've got professionals and we've got the student market. If we start maybe with the student market, because I think there is a bit of stigma attached to that, particularly for landlords that maybe haven't dealt with renting to students before. You guys manage 1,500 plus properties in the city centre. A large part of that is student lets. What would your advice be if I was a landlord today and said, I'm not sure about renting to students?
So I think, it's a question I'm always asked. There's the question usually is, you don't rent to students, do you? And my answer is, well, yeah, we do actually. And it's not that we are a student lettings business, but equally that makes a really large part of the people within our city. We've got a large kind of university presence here, as well as colleges and other further areas of study. And I think a lot of the horror stories that we've heard over the years as I suppose student accommodation has been more difficult and they're not always in the right locations that students want to be in, is that naturally it is creeping into the normal residential areas. And I think it's all about the management. That's the key point in that is knowing what you're setting up, how you're setting it up with those individuals and managing it to that really. It's not, I don't think it's a rocket science or it's any different to any residential tenancy, but it's just, that tenant might expect to only pay rent for 10 months of the year, or they may want to split that across 12, but that it's actually vacant for 2 months, or however it works. There's all different cases and it's all about the management.
And like you say, I think some of those horror stories can be around or originate from mismanagement, as you've said.
Precisely.
So it's important to get your management, get your contract tight, etc. And we'll talk maybe a bit about what you can do to protect yourself a little bit. But equally, what I was going to say is, and what I've always said to my investor clients is, there's horror stories with professionals as well.
Oh, 100%.
Whether they be doctors, nurses, people that just work locally in pubs, bars, restaurants.
Yeah.
I think we've seen horror stories within every industry of in terms of their demographic and employment status. So
precisely.
I mean, I would be saying don't rule out letting to students, particularly if you are in a market that is driven by a student town,
totally.
city. We're blessed in Birmingham itself to be, have multiple campuses and locations.
Precisely, and I think the other thing to account for is there's different types of students. It's not all first year, 18-year-olds moving out from home. There is also your second, third years. Exactly. It's not just that kind of Freshers' Week madness that we all think of. It's people doing further studies, some of which may be sponsored from other countries.
Yes.
A lot of them are sponsored quite handsomely by their.
I think we should maybe touch on that a little bit further, because again, if you've not worked or been investing in that kind of property, a sponsored student or a scholarship would be quite rare to see or hear of. So give us an example of what happens there and how you guys as a letting agency kind of vet that person.
Okay. So, it's quite a common thing that we usually see in our peak months of the market. So between May and September, Birmingham itself obviously is where I work, and it's quite a seasonal market. So that's when we tend to see them. They are usually sponsored by their embassy or sponsored by sometimes their family if they're a particularly well-off family, and they will usually traditionally arrive here, sometimes spend a week or 2 weeks in a hotel. They may have actually picked somewhere before they even depart on a flight
in the UK.
before they even land here, and they will usually have sponsorship letters to state that they earn X amount per annum, and we can reference them for that.
So you'd almost treat them as an employed, because they've got a regular income from underwritten from their embassy.
Precisely. From a referencing aspect, there's no real difference. And ultimately that money is paid into a UK bank account in the same way your or my salary is.
Okay. So some really good options there.
Totally.
Okay. And I think again, to put people's nerves at ease when renting to students, what can they be doing to offset some of that risk, maybe in terms of break clauses in the tenancy, insuring against lost rent,
So I think there's various different things you can put in place, and I suppose it depends how belt and braces you want to be and how secure you really want to be with it, and that's led by you as an investor. It's something we always recommend, but ultimately we're instructed by our client, we're instructed by our landlord. But I think things to consider are insurances specifically. So that is not necessarily just about the property, but that's actually about your tenancy with that tenant. So rent insurance is a really good example, and I think it's getting bigger and bigger in the market, that a lot more landlords are considering it, because I think through COVID there's been a high amount of furlough and and unfortunately redundancy and unemployment, and I think people have realised that actually it's quite an important topic. When you look at the average claim that goes to court, can be usually between sort of £8,000 and £10,000. For an investor who buys a property, our average rent is between £850 and £900. You work that out, that's about 9 months rent. Which is a lot. That takes a big chunk off the bottom line every year.
Okay. So landlords can take an insurance policy that covers them ultimately for rent arrears and lost rent.
Absolutely. So it's we've got a 100% claim rate with that, which isn't the same as everyone in the market. It will cover you to a rather high sum of rent.
Brilliant.
Which is brilliant.
And then in terms of insuring the property itself, the contents, what options are out there for landlords?
Absolutely. So in Birmingham City Centre, a lot of what we deal with is leasehold, so apartments and high-rise buildings. That will already have a buildings insurance policy in place, usually through the service charge. You will also pay for landlord's insurance, which will insure things that are part of the fabric of the property but aren't covered by your buildings insurance. So carpets, sanitary ware, fixtures and fittings effectively. And that's actually really inexpensive, and I recommend any landlord have it done.
Great, there you go. And from a tenant's point of view, what can they insure against?
So tenants can insure against things in their liability, so what is in our tenancy agreement to look after effectively. So things like carpets, sanitary ware again, and electrical items that are in the property, as well as furnishings. Most of our properties.
And I think it's dressed up as tenant liability insurance in a lot of cases.
Exactly. Tenant liability insurance is the usual phrase for it. We provide a quote to our tenant when they move in, but equally you can shop around and find
and that can cover them if they spilt a glass of red wine on the carpet or sofa. It's basically accidental damage for the furniture and belongings.
Exactly.
Okay, brilliant. What about a lot of questions I think come in around what bills are you as a landlord responsible for?
Yeah.
And what bills are the tenant responsible for? And then also in the void period in between the two tenancies, maybe a transitional period.
Yeah.
Do you want to just walk us through that maybe from start of tenancy all the way through to a transition between tenancies?
Yeah, again, I think these are things that can actually be the make or break of an investment. If you don't
Yeah.
factor them in when you're looking at getting a mortgage, etc., if you don't factor those things in, you can come a bit unstuck, I suppose. So a landlord would naturally be liable for their buy-to-let mortgage on that property. As well as that, you've got to factor in service charge and ground rent to the freeholder. Some developments, although it's more rare these days, but some will be combined. So some may have a service charge and a ground rent as one figure. You also need to consider things like, obviously the insurances we mentioned, that's another overhead. But things that the tenant will be liable for are things like council tax, utility bills, and I'm trying to think of anything else. That's probably about it, really. But actually, in the void period, a landlord or an investor would be liable for everything for that property. It's almost like that landlord lives there. And from, for instance, from Birmingham City Council's aspect, they're not interested whether there's a tenant or not. There's a bill to be paid, unfortunately.
Okay, brilliant. And what are the trends in the market from students at the moment, or tenants as a whole, should I say? Obviously, I think the quality of property has continued to improve.
Yeah.
And some of the additional amenities, either in the buildings or the properties themselves. We've got students now that don't necessarily come over and want to live in student accommodation.
Oh, 100%.
They want to live in very, high-end private rental sector apartments or houses. So what are some of the trends, some of the things maybe if you were looking to purchase, you'd want to try and get included or make sure the property offers?
So you mentioned a really key phrase there for me, which was build to rent apartments. So big high-rise, kind of fancy blocks of apartments that are often built and let out solely by the owner of the building.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Sometimes
investment from pension funds coming in for those. Yeah,
pension funds, exactly. And that's the competition really from an investor's aspect, because they've almost got the monopoly of that fancy building. You can't buy one in there, and every tenant wants to live in there. So I think the trends we've seen, and looking at some of the webinars I've been to from some of the portals like Rightmove and Boomin and Zoopla and stuff, tenants are looking for outside space. A lot of which are looking for parking space because they want to be able to travel around once restrictions are lifted, etc. And I think space generally, as in some more space within that property. I think where they've spent a lot of time there and an extended period where they wouldn't have normally, I think that's what they want. And the on-site amenities are really, really important. So gym, concierge, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay. So if you're looking to invest, try and pick up as many of those additional amenities as you can.
Absolutely.
Within reason that
I think
obviously
so.
Returns the right yield. But
exactly. It'll all reflect in the rent, all of these things as well.
I mean, I've seen in terms of apartment blocks, the demand for a concierge just for parcel deliveries is skyrocketed over the last few years.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people are shopping online now, and if there's not a concierge in the building,
not interested.
It's very difficult sometimes to appease that tenant. So, okay. And then in terms of transport links,
again, really important. I think tenants are working further afield. Naturally, we did touch on it briefly, but there's obviously been a level of redundancy and unemployment, unfortunately, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think tenants are now obviously having to be a bit more flexible with where they can work, how they can work. And so, travel is really important. We mentioned about cars. Obviously, there is a clean air zone coming to Birmingham.
Yes.
I think that will have an impact in a variety of different ways. I don't think it will affect everyone because at the moment there's a really slim amount of vehicles it actually affects. But I think as that grows, it will become like the congestion charge in London. And really and truly, unless you're a kind of a hybrid vehicle, then you're not really wanting to be in town. I think transport links are really, really important. And we're lucky here because we've got the tram and 3 train stations, etc.
Okay.
It's the same.
So Birmingham's a bit of a hotspot for investment.
100%. Yeah, I think a lot of the Midland cities, I suppose, have always been looked down on a little bit. But I think where they've had such a high level of investment, in the same way London did, 10, 15 years ago, they're really not to be,
as well as the lifestyle.
Absolutely, really not to be scoffed at.
Yeah, okay. And I think lifestyle is a big thing. So coming back to what you should be looking for,
what tenants want,
the lifestyle of not just living in a property, but going out to eat, drink, socialise. actually, if you can understand that market and can see it growing, it's a really good indication to look for that hopefully you'll have a successful investment.
Hopefully so, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Birmingham's got these kind of 3 or 4 key places where people want to be around, and you can see the new developments are being, the planning permissions being granted for developments close to that.
Strategically positioned around some of the hotspots.
Absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. So I suppose to summarise is do your research.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Understand the area you're investing in inside out.
Yeah.
Make a decision whether it is a house or an apartment and how hands-on an investor you want to be.
Yeah.
And the benefits that come with having an apartment that's managed, or the blocks managed and the amenities are managed, might just outweigh, this kind of the house, so to speak.
Yeah.
Understand your target audience, your demographic, and I suppose don't rule out students, because
Absolutely not. I think if you're protected and you make the right decisions at the first hurdle, I suppose, then I don't think you'll ever fall down.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks for your time, James.
No worries.
Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've all really found that useful today. Any questions on investing in property, whether it's specific to being a landlord or looking for purchase, to purchase your first buy-to-let, then do get in touch. Find us on the website centrick.co.uk. But hope you all enjoyed, and catch you next time.